Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May edition of Techspert Talks. I'm Troy Rainey, and I'll be your host for today's session. Today's presentation is Qlik Cloud Best Practices with our own Eric Thomas. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey Troy, yeah, Eric Thomas. I am a senior technical support engineer with Qlik. I've been working with Qlik products since about 2017, mainly focus on QlikSense SaaS support as well as application development and integrating QlikSense in third-party applications.
Awesome. All right, today we're going to talk about how to load data from on-premise data sources, how to schedule reloads, especially via APIs and automations. We're going to see a demo of that, and how to manage governed apps, and also how to manage users and group permissions. Now, Eric, imagine a scenario where people that are moving to Qlik Cloud and still have most of their data on premise. What's the best way to connect to that data?
Sure. Well, first of all, this is my tenant. For
Right.
customers that are able to open up their firewall and open up their ports, they should be able to do direct connections from Qlik Cloud. But I know most customers will be concerned about that and want to go a different route. And that's why we've done work creating the Qlik Data Gateway with direct access. You can install that directly on a server behind your firewall, and it'll just work as a gateway between your data sources and Qlik Cloud services so you can move your data back and forth.
Can you show us how that's set up?
Sure. I have a quick demo. I won't go through really the whole installation process. It's installed in the background.
Okay.
But what we have here is just a basic app. It's connecting to my on-premise Postgres database.
And that's using the direct access gateway, right?
Yep. Once it is installed, you'll have access to most of the same data sources that you had before. If you just type in direct access, you'll
Oh,
be
it
able to
highlights
see,
all those connections. That's
Mhm.
awesome.
provided the gateway is installed correctly and it shows connected, you can actually check that in the management console. I'll show that real quickly. Here's my two data gateways. I have on-prem and MySQL. These are on different servers. This one's the one I'm using for today. Shows connected.
Okay. First of all, is this free?
It is free. It comes included with any Qlik Cloud license. So I guess that's the caveat. You have to have a Qlik Cloud license.
Okay. And you noticed you had two connections there. Is it important to have a data gateway installed for each data source you have or each firewall?
It's probably more the latter. I would say for most customers, they shouldn't have to worry about having multiple data gateways installed. It really does come down to, I guess, how segmented your network is, and if you can only access certain data sources from certain environments, but otherwise, if you have, a pretty open network that can be connected to, you can just have one data gateway.
Okay. You got it installed. And how do you configure that?
Sure. So this one's my one to Postgres connection here. The interface doesn't change all that much. It really,
Okay.
instead of just being a standard connector, you're just picking what data gateway you're using here. So for
Okay.
example, I showed you my on-prem one's the one that's working and connected. My Postgres server is actually on the same server as data gateway. Probably not standardly recommended, but shows that I can just use localhost there and connect it directly to it on the data gateway server. Everything else is just standard connection there.
I'm just kind of curious when it comes to best practices with that connection. Is it better to use a fully qualified domain name or the IP address, or does it matter?
It shouldn't matter if the server that it's installed on can recognize the address or alias you're using.
Right.
It should work.
All right. So it's picking up all the data from that Postgres database. That's pretty cool.
Yep. And then I just have really basic app, just pulling some Postgres data in and storing it to a KVD.
All right. For people who wanted to find more information, where could they look to get
Yeah,
this?
sure. We do have a Qlik help page specifically dedicated to Qlik Data Gateway direct access. They give you an overview of kind of what some of the architecture looks like here. And then it goes through step by step the process of setting up, goes through requirements, then other things like what port should be opened. Luckily, Qlik Data Gateway is pretty straightforward. It's just TCP 443, pretty
Hmm.
standard port. And then internally, we have those ports here. And as far as downloading it goes, you can actually get it directly through the Qlik Cloud Management Console. If you
Okay.
go into this data gateway section that we already looked at, there is a deploy button here. The acknowledge and it'll give you an installer. I recommend just open up Qlik Cloud on your server that's behind your firewall and downloading
Hmm.
it directly onto the server.
And that basically opens up, like it says in the name, a gateway so you can connect to any on premise data directly to the cloud tenant using this installer. That's great.
Exactly. And definitely simplifies not having to open up a bunch of inbound ports.
Well, that was awesome and fairly easy, it seems. So, a next scenario I wanted to go through. So, once customers have their data and their apps, the next big admin step would be setting up reloads for that data to make sure all those apps are up to date. And what's the best way to do that in Qlik Cloud?
Sure, Qlik Cloud definitely differs from QlikSense Enterprise on Windows. You can still do a standard schedule reload. If I go to any of my apps here, I can set up a reload schedule and I could go through each one and schedule it. So if I do have, a chain of extract, transform, presentation layer type apps, a standard ETL, I could schedule those out. Customers that are used to task chaining, they'll either want to take advantage of our application automations, or if they have a third-party scheduler, they could schedule out their apps completely based off our Qlik APIs.
All right. How could you set up a task chain with automations?
Sure. Actually have a example here. It's based off an existing automation template that we have. So if I go up to new automation, look at all templates. We do have a couple standard ones created by Qlik. If you just want to make your own blank automation, apps in parallel, that kind of thing. We're interested in this one right here, which is reload apps as a task chain. You can see kind of the basic mock-up of what they're going for here. It even links to a community article that goes into a ton of detail.
All right. Well, yeah, let's take a look at the one you've already set up.
Sure.
Okay. And real quick, with automation, you've got the library of different blocks that are available on the left, your canvas in the middle, and all the configuration settings on the right.
Yep, that's exactly right. So you have a start block that kind of kicks everything off and it'll follow down the chain.
Okay. Can you walk us through what each block is doing?
Yeah, sure. We won't go into start yet. Do reload, essentially what I'm doing here. I'm looking for a specific app. I have a kind of ETLs already set up. I have an extract app, a transform app, and a presentation or UI layer app. I want them to kick off sequentially. So basically, as my extract finishes, I want my transform to start. As my transform finishes, I want my presentation layer to start. So this one, it's going to reload my extract app. We're going to wait for the reload to complete. And then I have a initial block afterwards, basically looking for the status of this reload. So basically we're saying here, if the reload is successful, we can go to this one, which is another do reload. If it's not successful, we'll go down the chain here till our no, and it's going to send an email. I'll set up to myself that says my extract reload failed.
Okay.
But this is a pretty successful run. I know all these apps reload, so they typically go down the yes path here. So let's say first one successful, we're going over and we're starting off our transform app. Then we're checking again, was it successful? So I do reload 2, that's the name of this block. Is it successful? Yes. Okay, then we'll go to do reload 3, which is our presentation layer. Was it successful? Yes. No. If no, then it goes to send an email again, and I have them named slightly different. So this one says your presentation reload failed. That's kind of how I kind of handle this ETL structure for these 3 apps.
That's great, and I love how visual it is too. So basically, this is your new Qlik Cloud task chain, different from how it was in Enterprise on Windows. But
I guess I will caveat: you do not have to specifically use the mailbox. There's actually quite a few out there. If you want to do like Teams or Slack, there's a couple other messaging options available. Take a look and see which one works best for you.
Great. So what are some ways to trigger this type of automation?
Sure. We'll go back to the start block. A couple different options here. You can manually trigger it from this button. You can schedule it for a specific time. Ones that I've been leaning towards are the triggered and webhook. We have a bunch of webhooks that are pre-configured. You can see the connectors that are available. A lot of customization options here. I personally am using a triggered version right now. I like this because what it does gives you a simple URL here that you can put directly in a REST browser so that you can trigger this remotely. You can trigger it through like Postman or put this directly into your third-party schedule if it's part of a different kind of ETL reload structure.
Because my understanding is a lot of customers are kind of used to having some sort of third-party scheduling tool. So this would tie right into that.
Yeah, exactly. I usually run this via Postman. So basically I copied my URL here. So you can see I've done that in Postman.
The URL is right there in the post. And you've added the header right below and that key there. All right. So you've just triggered that same automation we're looking at from Postman.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. So is there a way to get some sort of feedback from the automation so that from Postman you can tell that it succeeded?
Yeah, there is. This one runs so quickly that it's not giving us the ID we need, but typically it'll give you an ID that shows it's queued.
Okay.
You can take that ID and use one of our APIs to track the status of that. So if you are using like a third-party scheduler, you could check the status of it and then have other
You,
processes set up based on how that occurs. And I just
oh,
pulled up
okay.
our Qlik.dev where we document a lot of our APIs.
Okay, so you could come here and search the library of APIs for the type of command that you're looking for.
Yeah, it's really well done. And this is the one that I would utilize. Basically, retrieves the status of the run. All we need to know is the ID of the automation and then the run ID or the kind of ID of the ongoing task.
Okay, so
Using
this is
this.
like an additional API call that you would put into Postman to send to Qlik Cloud to get a response.
Yep, you put it in Postman or your third-party scheduler, and it'll give you some kind of response like this, sample response. Is it still going? Is it in progress, or did it complete successfully? Or, worst case scenario, it failed.
Yeah. But you've already built in the alerting from the Qlik Cloud side if it failed. But it's nice sometimes to get feedback that it isn't hanging or anything like that. So, what about a scenario where a customer has a large resource intensive production app, and you've also got developers who are working on a copy of that same app? What's a way for developers to work on that version without having to use the same large amount of data as in the production app?
Yeah, I can go to how I set that up. Let's say I have my developer space.
Okay. And this is
I
a shared
have
space, right?
This is a shared space, so you could do collaboration. You can have multiple people editing the document. You can have multiple people doing the reloads.
Okay.
Yep, and I have a QVD called source QVD.QVD, and I have my space-aware governed app. Then I have another space. This is a managed space for your prod versions. And
Okay.
here I have a space-aware governed app and another source QVD.QVD.
Okay. But basically, this is the production app and it's loading from this data source and the developer version similarly named and running from the data source in the shared space where it's located.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So, what's the difference in these QVDs? Can we take a closer look at those?
Sure. This is my production QVD, just under 2 million rows.
All right.
And if I go to my developers app or developer space to open that data set, this one is just sitting at just under 2,000,
But it's dramatically smaller.
dramatically smaller, much easier to use. So let's go ahead and open our app itself, and I could show you how the script works for something like this.
Okay.
In here, I have two data load scripts set up already. This is probably the more traditional one, basically just loading a couple of my files from our source QVD. Difference is this one is pointing at a specific space. Every space
Okay.
has a data file. So this one's pulling from app developers data files, and it's looking for source QVD. Qlik Cloud has a concept called space-aware data syntax. And this
Okay.
essentially means if we don't provide a space, it'll reload from the context that the app is located. So for example, we have an app developer space, we have data files, and we have that source QVD in our developer space. And then we have production apps in our production app space that has a data files that has its own set of QVDs. We named them the same so that we could utilize the same script. So really here, if I reload this in my app developer space, it's going to be pulling from that much smaller QVD. If I reload this in my production apps managed space, it'll be utilizing that much larger full data set.
That's really smart. So without changing the script, the two apps can mirror each other and just when the developers make a change they want to publish to the production app, they just publish that to the managed space and it picks up the larger data set automatically.
Yeah, you will have to reload it. I won't say automatically, but
Oh,
yes.
okay. Okay, but that seems like a super smart and efficient way to do it. All right. So once an admin gets all this set up, I imagine that the next step would be to start granting access to users so they can see the production app. I know admins don't want to grant access on an individual basis. What's the recommended way to set that up to make it easier on tenant admins?
Yeah, sure. I've gotten this request a couple times in support cases. What you can do, and I think works really nicely, is to utilize the group functionality that Qlik Cloud Services has. So you could go into the space details. So you have app developers pulled up. I go to my members section, and I could add a member individually and
All right.
define their permissions.
Yeah.
Let's say Dell here.
But
I can
that's
do
what we
that.
want to kind of get away from.
Yeah, the much better option, in my opinion, is to basically have logical groups set up in your third-party Active Directory. In this case, I have a identity provider set up to go to Azure AD.
Okay. And what are the requirements for setting up a third-party IDP like this?
Yeah, it is required in your license to bring your own third-party IDP that can pass over group claims. Otherwise, you're using the standard Qlik IDP, which actually doesn't have groups, at least at the
Okay.
moment.
And we're using Azure Active Directory here.
And then the other requirement is if I go into the settings here, let's scroll down just a bit. It's under feature control. We have creation of groups. And this
Okay.
essentially does what it says here.
All right. So basically, that means if they exist on the Active Directory you're using, Qlik Cloud will pick those up.
Yeah, exactly. And I have my groups over here in Azure, just so you can see what ones I'm working with. These groups should all be available in my Qlik Cloud tenant.
Okay. Well, let's take a scenario where developers been working on a new app they want to make available for all the sales team. How can you grant access to the entire sales team without assigning individual permissions then?
Yeah. So if we're giving it to the sales team, it's probably a production app. Let's go to our production app space. We'd go into our space details, go into members here. Let's go ahead and go add members, and then we're going to enter our group. So if we quickly look over here, it's u.s.sales. That's our sales team. There it goes. It pulls up. It denotes that it is a group. So I'll go ahead and add that in. Notifications will not be sent to users. You can add them all at the same time. And as new users are added to that sales team, they are automatically given these permissions.
Okay.
So once we've done that, we have our US sales team down here, and those members should be able to access this space in those apps and do those permissions that we gave them.
Awesome. So that's a quick way of granting everybody in that Active Directory group access to this space and everything inside it.
Absolutely.
That is sweet. So let's take it from another perspective. I know admins and especially support, we see this a lot. If a user is complaining about not having access to something that they're expecting to, how can you troubleshoot that?
Yeah, I would definitely start with do some backtracking. If you go into space details, if you go into members like we looked at before, who should be getting here, you could search them by name. And when we start using groups, you can go back to your Azure AD, double check that the user's actually in that group that you expect them to. That would be the first thing. But you also can go to a diagnose claims endpoint that we have here. This right here, you just add this at the end of your tenant.
So I see API. So this is like an API call against your Qlik Cloud tenant. And what is it asking?
Yeah, so this is asking what claims are coming over from our external IDP, Azure in this case. So you'll see some of the standard, what's this user's name? It's a user IDs, things like that, what roles they have in the tenant. The more interesting ones for troubleshooting would be down here. You can actually see, and under the extra claims portion, what groups this user is part of. If you get that request, we'll have that user look at this endpoint with diagnosed claims, and you'll see for that user what they are getting from the Azure side of things. So if you are using US sales, make sure that they have US sales as part of their group claims. If that wasn't there, there's something you need to rectify on the Azure side of things.
That's awesome. And that's a pretty specific API call. Where can people find that API call? Or is there an article about how to do this sort of thing?
For diagnosed claims, that should be in the Qlik.dev APIs. You should be able to find that in here. They're all documented.
Okay. And just for everybody on this call, we're going to include all the links that we're showing and mentioning along with the recording of this session once we're all finished. Well, now it's time for Q&A. Please submit your questions through the Q&A panel on the left side of your On24 console. I see we got a lot of questions that already come in. Eric, why don't we just take them from the top? First question. Does using an alias create any issues with connecting to on-premise data sources?
Sure. I'm going to assume we're talking about using data gateway here. Data connections are from the context of the server or machine that the gateway is installed on. Alias should be fine, provided the server is on and can resolve it. In my example, I used localhost. That's not something that, Qlik Cloud Services would be able to resolve, right? So yeah, I would say yes.
Okay, great. Next question. Why should I be concerned with resources in Qlik Cloud? Why is it better to have smaller QBDs for the developers?
Yeah, sure. Maybe didn't go into that as in depth. So the example that comes to my mind was from a customer that was specifically using dedicated capacity on one of
Right.
their managed spaces. They were also using it on their developer spaces. What was occurring for them is this app had hundreds and hundreds of millions of rows, unfortunately some poorly optimized expressions. And so there are limitations on resources in Qlik Cloud. Dedicated capacity gives you a little extra, but they were getting close to their resource usage. And they had two of the same app essentially. They had a dev version that devs were kind of actively updating and modifying. And then they had a production version. They're both using the same amount of data and the same unfortunate expressions, and then causing them to blow through a ton of resources. So this was
Right.
we did actually this exact solution for them of having two spaces, uses space aware data syntax to allow them to have a light and lean dev version that they could test maybe small chunks of the data and validate performance on some of their expressions and optimize those. And then they had a full-fledged production version using, their full gamut of data.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Moving on. Is there a way to change the font of all the objects in an app at once?
Mm, yeah, not something we really talked about today, huh?
Yeah.
But yes, I'm not 100% on this one. If you can change every single one with just one minor change, but you should be able to utilize a custom theme and
Right.
set the font for all the QV objects. There should be some documentation out there on custom themes that I would look into for something like that.
There definitely is. And we've done a few Techspert talks around themes, talking about custom themes when it comes to fonts. So I think you're right on with that. Next question. How can we use color to highlight KPIs in a table? Got a lot of visualization questions here.
Yeah, that's something we covered much today. If you want to highlight values in a table, kind of each column or each field and expression dimension has a background expression option. So you could do a little bit of logic to do the coloring there. So if your KPI was, if it's greater than 75%, it's green. If it's 50% or greater, orange, else it's red. You could use
Uh-huh.
something like that in the background expression field on each field in the table to get that kind of functionality going.
That's a great tip. And I'd also recommend doing a quick search in Qlik Community if you're looking for some more specific syntax. There's a lot of users and luminaries and even Qlik staff that are monitoring those forums and might be able to help you out with some more specifics. Next question. Is it possible to use ClickSense desktop, and where can I find it? I guess that could be still a little confusing for people with Qlik Cloud.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, ClickSense Desktop's still out there, it's still in use, and you can actually download it directly from Qlik Cloud. If you go up to your profile in the upper right corner here, let's go
Mm-hmm.
to Profile Settings under Tools. We have a couple of tools available, and here's a ClickSense Desktop section. So it'll just get you the latest version, and then you can actually authenticate it against Qlik Cloud. So you can log into the ClickSense desktop and it'll use your same Qlik Cloud license. Yes, Qlik Cloud desktop's still out there. You can get it directly through the tools section of your profile settings.
Awesome. Thanks for showing that.
Mhm.
Next question. Can you still use extensions with Qlik Cloud?
Yes, absolutely. In the management console, there is a extension section here where you can add and import different extensions you get from something like Quick Developer.
Awesome. Great. All right. How can I make all the sheets in my app public when I move to a shared space?
There's no publish all button that I'm aware of. So you would have to go into each individual sheet and right click them and do the make public option for each sheet. So yeah, unfortunately, no way to publish all, but it does give you the control over what you want to make public or not.
Okay. Next question. Is there any way we can duplicate the published apps to a development workspace?
Definitely gotten this question before. Yes, well, kind of. Whenever you publish an app, it will leave the original version intact. So if that's coming from your personal space, you'll have an app in your personal space. That's the kind of origin version. It's coming from a shared space. There'll still be a copy in your shared space. So yes, you can go that route and you can duplicate that from your shared or personal space. Kind of the only caveat I've seen distributing apps from ClickSense Enterprise for Windows. those we just have a published version in a managed space. So there's no way to really duplicate those. There are some tricks out there you can find using Qlik CLI, which is like a command line interface that's like streamlined a bunch of Qlik APIs. Ultimately, this is something that's looked at to be changed in the future, make it easier to duplicate and manage managed apps. So yeah, I guess more to come on that one.
Great. Next question. What are the user roles, and is it possible to create new ones? I took a look at some of those briefly in your demo.
Yeah, we did have those pulled up during the demo. So just for a managed space, if I go to add members real quick, we can look at the roles. Has restricted view, can contribute, can manage, can consume data, can publish. So those are the ones in a managed space.
Okay.
Self-explanatory enough what they give you access to. There's a couple different ones in the developer space. Can view, can edit data in an app, and can manage and can consume data like we had previously. So those are permissions. As far as the second part of that question, you can't create new ones at the moment. A functionality for editing or adding your own has been discussed and maybe something we see down the line. But as of right now, you're stuck with the predefined permissions and roles.
Okay. Next question. How do you hide the QBD files from users in a shared or managed space?
That's another kind of permissions question. Can consume data is the important factor there. This is can list and use data sources. You can also have your users, if you go into this catalog, you can have them just look for apps to make it easier so they're not seeing apps and QBDs. Yeah, that can consume data is the toggle I would change for those users.
Okay. So if they have can consume data but not view, then it'll just give them access to the data, but they won't actually see it in there.
Yeah, can consume data lets them see data connections and data files that are in that space. So that would, if that's off, they'll just see apps.
Okay, great. Is there a way to migrate bookmarks from ClickSense Enterprise on Windows to Qlik Cloud?
That's a good one. Bookmarks are always a little bit tricky. As far as the utility that does that, there may be something out there in the community. But from what I remember, let's say we're going the traditional process of just exporting apps. If you export an unpublished app from ClickSense Enterprise for Windows, that should include all content, including bookmarks. I think you have to go through that process of publishing what sheets that you want to use. Same thing with publishing the bookmarks. If it is a published version of the app on ClickSense Enterprise for Windows, it's only going to be the published content. So if you had a bunch of community sheets that weren't public or personal sheets in a published app, those wouldn't make it across. And same thing with the bookmarks. I would suggest getting all the bookmarks active in an app and exporting it. That should include all the bookmarks.
Okay. That's a big topic, migrating from ClickSense Enterprise to Qlik Cloud. And lots of little details like that.
So. Tons of questions on that.
Yeah, we could have a whole session on that one or more. Is Data Gateway capable of reloading on-prem flat files?
Like QEs and CSVs from Data Gateway. Okay, there's no connector that I'm aware of in the app that goes directly to like a file location. What you can do is use any of the existing file locations connectors. I mean, we have a ton out there. You can do Amazon S3, Azure Storage, Dropbox, Google Cloud, Google Drive, SharePoint, SFTP, OneDrive, so that would be what I would suggest.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. How do you do version control in Qlik Cloud? For example, restoring previous versions of an app.
Yeah, that's a good one too. You can duplicate apps like we kind of talked about in that previous question. You have your developers copying versions before they publish it and kind of renaming it, maybe put a date on it or version number, however you do your naming. You could also do some pretty cool things with application automation. I know there's a great article on actually doing this. There's application blocks and application automation to serialize an app, make it base 64. You could upload that to something like GitHub, whatever repository you're using. And then there's actually another block to import an app that's been serialized.
That's a good point. I remember we had a Techspert talk around application automation, and we actually demoed a bit of that. So
sure.
We'll include a link for sure. All right. What role is necessary to allow someone to trigger a reload?
Yeah, roles. Let's see. Can reload, can manage at least, I believe. Let me pull up the roles real quick. You'll need can manage. The caveat will be you'll need can consume data for every space that you're utilizing a connection of. Depends on where your data connections are, but yeah, can consume data and can manage.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, last few questions. Are there any settings on the Azure side to ensure that Qlik Cloud can connect to Azure IDP?
There is an awesome community article on connecting Qlik Cloud to Azure AD, and it goes just step by step, every step you're doing in Azure, every step you're doing in Qlik Cloud to make that connection. That's what I followed to actually set mine up. So yeah, Troy, maybe I can provide you that.
Great. Yeah, we'll include that link for sure. What monitoring apps are available for keeping track of the apps and their usage in a Qlik Cloud tenant?
For keeping track apps and usage, you're best looking at one called the entitlement analyzer. That one does have app usage, and it also goes into how you're utilizing your different license allocations for your users. We have our official support articles, and that shows all our current monitoring apps for both Qlik Cloud and on-premise. So maybe you can look through there and find one that suits a need.
Great. All right, last question. What connectors should I use to load data stored in Google Spreadsheets?
Google Spreadsheets can be done with the Google Drive connector. Let me just double check. Yeah, Google Drive and Spreadsheets is what I would go for.
Yeah, that seems pretty straightforward. And that allows you to create a connection to your Google Drive and load specific spreadsheets. All right, well, thank you very much, Eric. I think this will help a lot of people get comfortable with capabilities of Qlik Cloud, and you've introduced a lot of best practices for managing users and apps and reloads. It's nice to address a lot of topics in one session, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us on a Qlik community.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this session. And thank you to Eric for presenting. We appreciate getting experts like Eric to share with us. Here's our legal disclaimer. And thank you once again. Have a great rest of your day.